She married a human to stop a war, only to discover why his kind is forbidden in a distant corner of the galaxy, where the stars shone like diamonds scattered across an endless ocean. The planet Calera faced the most crucial moment in its history. The Calari, a peaceful and resource-rich species, had lived in harmony with their world for centuries. But for the last few decades, their very survival had been threatened by the brutal T-Rashka, a ruthless and war-hungry species who had slowly but surely crushed one world after another. The T-Rashka were the galaxy's most powerful military force, and their hunger for dominance knew no bounds. Their war machines were invincible, their armies vast, and their cruelty unmatched. Princess Alara, heir to the throne of Calera, stood in the grand council chamber of her planet's capital city, gazing out the large windows at the vast forests and mountains below. Despite the beauty of her home, her heart was heavy. The Caleri were no match for the T-Rashka. All her life, Alara had known that she would someday rule her people, but now, the weight of that responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like never before. Her people were on the brink of extinction, and the war was only intensifying. The Caleri High Council had gathered in the chamber, their faces grim. They spoke in hushed voices, discussing the latest developments. The T-Rashka had already conquered several neighboring systems, and the Caleri were next. Alara's people were not warriors, and they had no hope of fighting back against such an overwhelming force. Their only option was to seek help from outside the galaxy, but who would come to their aid? Most species, even those more powerful than the Caleri, had turned a blind eye to the suffering of their kind. Then one of the council members stood and spoke, his voice calm but full of authority. "There is one choice left, Princess, one last hope." Alara turned toward the speaker. He was an elder statesman, wise and respected. His name was Kaldar, and his words carried weight. "What is this choice?" she asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "The Earth Federation," Kaldar said, his voice unwavering. "We have sent emissaries to the Federation, and they have agreed to help us. But the cost is high." Alara frowned. The Earth Federation was known throughout the galaxy, but not for its military strength. The Federation had always kept to itself, maintaining a policy of neutrality in galactic conflicts. Their forces were small compared to the mighty T-Rashka, and their soldiers lacked the experience of galactic warfare. But there was something the Federation possessed that other species did not: human ingenuity. Humans had a unique ability to think outside the box, to find solutions when all seemed lost. Their technology was primitive compared to the other galactic powers, but their minds were sharp, and they had proven time and again that they could adapt to any situation. "And what is the cost?" Alara asked, knowing that nothing in this galaxy came without a price. "There is a proposal," Kaldar continued. "The Federation has suggested an alliance, but it requires something more. They wish for you, Princess Alara, to marry a human officer. His name is Captain Jonathan Steele." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Alara blinked, processing the information. Marry a human? It seemed absurd. But then again, what choice did she have? If this union could save her people, perhaps it was worth the sacrifice. "Why a marriage?" Alara asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Why not just send their forces to aid us?" Kaldar sighed. "The Federation is stretched thin. They are neutral, yes, but they have allies in other systems who will not risk war with the T-Rashka for the sake of one species. The marriage is a symbol. A pledge of unity between our worlds. It will solidify the alliance and ensure the Federation's full support. Without it, they will not commit their forces." Alara's mind raced. The idea of marrying a human was beyond strange. She had been raised to believe that such unions between species were unnatural. The Caleri had always married within their own kind, their bonds forged in their shared history and traditions. But now, in the face of annihilation, those traditions seemed so distant, so unimportant. Kaldar placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of support. "I know this is difficult, Princess, but you are our only hope. You must make this sacrifice for the survival of the Caleri. Your marriage to Captain Steele will give us the time we need to prepare for the T-Rashka's next move." Alara turned away from the council, her heart heavy. She had always known that leadership would require difficult choices, but she had never imagined this. A marriage to a man from a far-off world, a world she knew nothing about. What kind of man would this Captain Steele be? What would he expect from her, and what would she be expected to give in return? These questions weighed heavily on her mind, but she had no answers. That evening, after the council meeting, Alara retired to her chambers, her thoughts swirling like a storm. She stood before the large mirror in her room, looking at her reflection. She was the future of her people, the one they relied on to lead them through the darkest times. She could not let them down, but the cost of this alliance, it was so much more than she had expected. The following day, a Federation ship arrived at Calera. The ambassador aboard was a tall man with dark hair and sharp features, Captain Jonathan Steele. He was everything Alara had imagined, a soldier disciplined and focused. His uniform was crisp, and his eyes carried a sense of calm authority that put her on edge. This was not a man who would bend easily. Their first meeting was brief, formal. The Federation's proposal had already been made clear, and now it was time for Alara to make her decision. Captain Steele, however, did not seem eager to meet with her. His demeanor was respectful but distant, as though he had no interest in making this marriage more than a political transaction. "I understand the necessity of this union, Princess," Steele said, his voice steady and unemotional. "But I must admit, I am not eager for this. My duty to the Federation is my priority, but I know the importance of this alliance. If it is the only way to save your people, I will do my part." Alara nodded, taking in his words. He was a man of duty, much like the Caleri. But there was something about his coldness that unsettled her. Was he as reluctant as she was, or was he simply putting on a facade for the sake of diplomacy? "Do you have any questions, Captain?" Alara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Steele's eyes met hers, and for a moment something flickered in them, perhaps curiosity, perhaps something more. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "Only one," he said. "Are you prepared for the consequences of this decision, Princess? This is not just a marriage. This is a political statement. It will change the course of your people's future." Alara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked down at her hands, trembling slightly. She had never been more uncertain in her life. "I don't know," she said softly. "But I will do what I must," Steele nodded. "As will I," and with that their fates were sealed. The marriage ceremony took place on the grandest day Calera had ever seen. The sky was clear, the stars twinkling brightly as if the universe itself were watching the moment unfold. The palace was decorated with thousands of sparkling lights, banners of every color flying proudly in the wind. It was meant to be a day of celebration, a symbol of hope for a world on the brink of destruction. But for Princess Alara, it felt more like the beginning of a nightmare. She stood in front of the mirror in her private chambers, dressed in the elaborate ceremonial gown of her people. The fabric shimmered in the light, its deep blue hue representing the heart of Calera, a symbol of peace and strength. Her dark hair was braided into intricate patterns, and delicate gold jewelry adorned her neck and wrists. She looked every bit the princess she was meant to be, the future ruler of her people. Yet she felt small, insignificant, trapped in a role she had not chosen for herself. Alara took a deep breath and tried to steady her racing heart. This was the moment that would decide the fate of her people. The Federation's forces would come, but only because of this marriage. Only because of her willingness to sacrifice everything she knew for the survival of her world. She couldn't afford to show weakness, not now. Her mind wandered to the man she was about to marry, Captain Jonathan Steele. She had met him only once, during the brief meeting on the day the Federation had arrived. He had seemed so distant, so professional. There was no warmth in his eyes, no sense of connection. He had spoken of duty, of responsibility, and of the importance of the alliance. But Alara had sensed something else beneath his words, something cold, something he wasn't willing to reveal. As the ceremony drew nearer, Alara couldn't help but feel a knot in her stomach. She had been raised to believe in the traditions of her people, in the sacred bonds of marriage. She had always imagined that her wedding would be filled with love and joy, a union of two souls bound together by destiny. But this was not a marriage for love. It was a marriage of necessity, a political act that could save or destroy everything she held dear. The doors to her chambers opened, and her maidservant entered, her face filled with concern. "Your Highness, it is time." Alara nodded silently, her throat tight with emotion. She allowed herself one last glance at her reflection before turning to follow her servant. She could hear the distant sounds of music and laughter from the grand hall, where the ceremony was about to begin. The people of Calera had gathered to witness their princess marry a stranger, a human, in the hopes that this union would bring peace. As Alara entered the hall, she was met with a wave of applause. The guests, some of whom she recognized, others who were strangers, all rose to their feet in respect. The Caleri were a proud people, and they had placed all their hopes in her. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. She could not help but feel like a pawn, her every move watched by those who depended on her. At the front of the hall, standing beside the High Priestess, was Captain Steele. He was dressed in his Federation uniform, the deep blue and silver colors contrasting sharply with the gold and white of the Caleri ceremonial attire. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp features, his expression neutral as he looked at her. He didn't smile, didn't show any sign of emotion. It was as if this was just another duty for him, another mission to complete. Alara took her place beside him, feeling the weight of the moment. The High Priestess began the ceremony, her voice soft and melodic, her words ancient and full of meaning. Alara tried to focus on the ritual, on the sacred vows that were being spoken, but her mind kept drifting. She couldn't help but wonder what kind of life she was about to begin. Would she ever be able to see this man as anything more than a political partner? Would she ever understand the strange world he came from? And more importantly, what kind of man was Captain Steele really? As the ceremony progressed, Alara's thoughts were interrupted by the moment that would change her life forever. The High Priestess turned to them, and the time had come for them to exchange vows. Alara's heart raced as she looked at Steele, wondering what he was thinking, what was going through his mind as they stood there, bound by duty and fate. I, Princess Alara of Calera, pledge myself to you, Captain Jonathan Steele, as my partner, my ally, and my husband. Alara spoke the words clearly, though they felt foreign on her tongue. She knew they were necessary, but it did not make them any easier to say. Steele looked at her, his eyes meeting hers for the briefest of moments before he spoke his vow. I, Captain Jonathan Steele of the Earth Federation, pledge myself to you, Princess Alara of Calera, as my partner, my ally, and my wife. The words were simple, yet powerful. The crowd erupted in applause as the ceremony concluded, but Alara couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that lingered inside her. She was now bound to this man, this human, in a way she had never imagined. And though she had promised herself that she would do whatever it took to save her people, she couldn't help but wonder if this was the right choice. The next few days passed in a blur of formalities. Alara and Captain Steele were introduced as a married couple to the leaders of various factions who had come to witness the union. The Federation's forces would soon be arriving in Calera's system, and the alliance would be cemented. Alara spent long hours in meetings, discussing military strategy and the best way to protect her world. But through it all, she couldn't stop thinking about Steele. He was always there, standing beside her, his presence constant yet distant. She noticed that he often seemed lost in thought, his gaze distant, as if he were contemplating something far beyond the events taking place around him. He never once sought her company, never tried to engage in conversation outside of their official duties. It was as if their marriage, the very reason they had come together, was nothing more than a professional obligation for him. Alara began to wonder if that was all it would ever be. Was this union truly a partnership? Or had she been mistaken, believing that there could ever be more between them? One evening, after a long day of meetings, Alara found herself alone in her chambers, staring out at the distant stars. The weight of her responsibilities pressed down on her chest, and she longed for a moment of peace, a moment of clarity. She had made this choice for the good of her people, but it was becoming increasingly clear that she knew nothing about the man she had married. She rose from her chair and walked to the balcony, gazing out at the beauty of Calera's twin moons as they rose over the horizon. It was then that she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned, and there he was, Captain Steele, standing in the doorway, his face as unreadable as ever. "Princess," he said, his voice low, almost as if he were unsure of himself. "I know this isn't easy for you. It's not easy for me either." Alara's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to speak so openly, so directly. For the first time since their wedding, she saw a glimpse of something in his eyes, a hint of vulnerability. But it was fleeting, gone almost as soon as it appeared. "You don't have to do this," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you want to leave, I will not hold you to this marriage." Steele looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I can't leave. This is more than just a marriage, Princess. This is the future of both our people. We both have a duty to uphold." "I understand that," Alara replied, her voice steady, But what about us? What about the future of this marriage? Steele's gaze softened, but only for a moment. I don't know what the future holds, Princess. I don't even know if I can make you trust me. But I promise you this, I will not let the Federation fail you, and I will protect Calera no matter what. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Alara standing alone once again, her heart heavy with the uncertainty of the future. She had made her choice, but now she had to wonder, was it the right one? Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, Alara found herself more and more caught between duty and her growing unease. Captain Steele, though a husband in name, remained distant and closed off. They spent their days in meetings with the Caleri High Council and the Federation officers who had arrived to oversee the alliance. They worked side by side, but it felt like a business arrangement more than a partnership. Despite their shared goal of saving Calera, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She began to notice things about Steele that unsettled her. There were moments when he seemed lost in thought, staring off into space, his eyes distant. He was always calm, collected, and professional in public, but Alara could sense the tension beneath his calm exterior. It was as though he was carrying a heavy burden, something he couldn't or wouldn't share with her. One evening, after a long day of strategizing and discussing tactics with the Federation officers, Alara found herself standing alone on the balcony of their private quarters. The stars above Calera shone brightly, their light casting a soft glow across the landscape. The cool night air calmed her, but it did little to ease the uncertainty that had taken root in her heart. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Steele approaching. His face was as serious as ever, but there was something different about him tonight. His expression was softer, almost reluctant, as though he were debating whether or not to speak. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Princess," he said, his voice low. "But there's something I need to tell you." Alara's heart skipped a beat. It was rare for Steele to speak to her so openly without the mask of formality he wore so often. "What is it, Captain?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Steele hesitated for a moment, his eyes searching the stars as if he were gathering the courage to reveal something important. "There's more to the Federation than you know," he said at last, his voice tinged with a seriousness that made Alara's stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" she asked, stepping closer to him. "What is it you're not telling me?" Steele glanced at her, his face hardening for a moment before he looked away again. "It's about humanity. There's a reason humans have been banned from the Galactic Alliance." Alara felt a chill run through her. She had heard rumors about the humans' past, whispers of something dark and dangerous, but she had never imagined it would come from Steele himself. "Banned?" she repeated, her voice shaky. "Why, I thought the Earth Federation was neutral." "Why would anyone ban your people?" Steele let out a deep sigh, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of his secret was finally getting to him. "It's not what you think. The Federation's neutrality is a cover, Princess. The truth is, humanity has a history. A history that, if it came to light, would destroy everything the Federation stands for." Alara's mind raced as she tried to process his words. "What do you mean? What is this history?" Steele met her gaze, his eyes dark and filled with regret. "Long ago, humans had the ability to manipulate space-time. We could bend the very fabric of the universe to our will. It was a power unlike anything any other species had ever seen." Alara was stunned. She had always known humans were clever and resourceful, but this was something beyond anything she had imagined. "That sounds impossible. Why would such a power be banned?" Steele looked at the ground, unable to meet her eyes. "Because we used it recklessly. We used it to conquer, to destroy. The first human empire stretched across dozens of star systems, and when we lost control of our power, we tore apart entire worlds. It wasn't just the destruction. It was what we were capable of doing if we ever regained that power. The galaxy feared us, and so we were exiled, forbidden from joining any galactic alliance, banned from nearly every corner of the universe." Alara took a step back, her mind spinning. You destroyed entire worlds?" Steele nodded, his voice heavy with shame. "We were young, reckless, and consumed by our own ambition. We thought we were invincible, but when we saw the damage we'd caused, we swore never to let it happen again. The Federation was formed to keep us in check, to ensure that humanity would never again have the power to destroy the galaxy." Alara stood in silence, the weight of Steele's words pressing down on her. This was not the man she had married. This wasn't the officer who had pledged to protect Calera. This was someone much more complicated, someone who carried a dark legacy. "But why are you here?" Alara finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you agree to this marriage, knowing what your people have done?" Steele met her gaze, his expression softer now, though the pain was still evident in his eyes. "Because I believe humanity has changed. I believe we can redeem ourselves. And I believe that if we work together, we can prevent history from repeating itself." Alara felt a mixture of emotions: shock, confusion, anger. She had come to Kalara expecting to protect her people, but now she was faced with the truth of the man she had married and the dark history of his kind. How could she trust him? How could she trust humanity, knowing what they were capable of? Steele seemed to sense her growing distrust. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have told you sooner. I never wanted you to learn about this side of humanity, especially not this way. But I can't hide it any longer. You need to know the truth." Alara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had a duty to her people. She couldn't let the history of one species dictate the future of her world. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the warning signs. Steele had been right about one thing: this marriage was more than just a political alliance. It was a gamble, a dangerous gamble that could either save or destroy everything she had worked for. "I don't know what to think," she said quietly, her voice shaking. "How can I trust you knowing what your people have done?" Steele reached out, his hand hovering near hers, but he didn't touch her. "I don't expect you to trust me immediately, Princess, but I will prove to you that humanity has changed, that I've changed." Alara met his gaze, her heart heavy with uncertainty. She had always believed in the power of redemption, in the ability of individuals to change. But could humanity truly change? Could Steele be trusted? Or was she about to make a mistake that would cost her everything? She didn't know the answer, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The days following their conversation were filled with tension. Alara had hoped that understanding the truth would bring some clarity, but instead, it only added to the confusion. The weight of Steele's revelation hung over her like a dark cloud. She couldn't stop thinking about the power humanity had once wielded, how it had nearly destroyed entire star systems. She could not ignore the fact that Steele carried this heavy legacy with him, even if he was now committed to protecting Kalara. Her nights were restless, her dreams haunted by visions of destruction, worlds torn apart by the reckless use of power. She had always known the importance of the alliance with the Federation, but now she wasn't sure if the cost was too high. Steele's promise to redeem humanity sounded noble, but was it possible? Was she risking her world's future by trusting him? But she also understood something else. The Federation's help was the only way to protect Kalara. The Tirashka were growing bolder, and without the Federation's advanced technology, they would not stand a chance. As much as she feared Steele's past, she knew that the future of her people depended on the success of this fragile alliance. In the days that followed, the tension between them grew. Steele, ever the soldier, focused on his duties, but Alara saw the strain in his eyes. He was trying to prove himself, trying to show her that humanity could be trusted, but the weight of his past seemed to pull him in different directions. He was always polite, always respectful, but there was a distance between them that seemed impossible to close. One evening, after another exhausting round of meetings with the Federation officers, Alara found herself once again standing alone on the balcony of their shared quarters. The cool night air did little to calm her. She looked out at the stars, wondering if the Federation's arrival was truly the salvation they hoped for, or if it was the beginning of the end. It was then that Steele appeared, his footsteps quiet on the stone floor. Alara didn't turn to look at him, but she could feel his presence behind her, his shadow falling across the light from the stars. "Alara," Steele's voice broke the silence. "We need to talk," she sighed, turning to face him. She had no idea what he wanted to discuss now, but she knew it wouldn't be an easy conversation. "What is it now, Captain?" Steele stepped closer, his expression more serious than she had ever seen. "I can't keep pretending that everything is fine. I know you don't trust me, and I understand why. But I'm asking you to believe that I'm not the man my people once were. I'm not asking for your trust just because I'm your husband, but because I believe in what we're doing here. I believe we can stop the war and make things right." Alara felt a pang of guilt twist in her chest. She had been avoiding him, hiding behind her doubts and fears, but the truth was, she didn't want to distrust him. She didn't want to be trapped in a marriage to a man whose past was so dark and dangerous. But as she looked at him now, she saw something in his eyes, something that made her think he might be telling the truth. Perhaps humanity could change. Perhaps he could change. "I want to believe you, Steele," she said quietly. "I really do, but it's hard. You've told me the worst of what your people have done. How can I be sure that history won't repeat itself?" Steele's eyes softened, and for the first time since their marriage, he seemed vulnerable. "I don't know if I can make you believe me, Alara, but I can promise you this. I will do everything I can to prove that humanity has learned from its past. I'm not asking you to forget, but I'm asking you to give us a chance. If we can't change, if we can't redeem ourselves, then we don't deserve the future we're trying to build." The sincerity in his voice struck her. She had never seen him so open, so raw. For all his strength and discipline, there was a side of him she had never fully understood, a side that was just as haunted by the past as she was. "Captain," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I have to protect my people. I have to make the right choices for them. But I can't do this alone. If you really believe in what you're saying, then show me. Show me that you can lead humanity into something better. Prove that you're not just a soldier bound by duty, but a man capable of real change." For a moment, there was silence between them. Steele seemed to search her face as if looking for some sign that she was sincere in her plea. Finally, he nodded, his jaw tightening in resolve. "I will, Alara," he said firmly. "I will do whatever it takes." The next few days were a blur of activity. The Federation's forces were ready to launch a joint mission to defend Calera from the T-Rashka's next strike, and Alara found herself working side by side with Steele more than ever before. As the pressure mounted, she saw something in him that she had not expected, a fierce determination to succeed, not just for the Federation, but for her people as well. He proved himself not only with his words, but with his actions. He worked tirelessly with the Federation officers, coordinating plans and ensuring that everything was in place for the coming battle. He showed a deep respect for the Caleri way of life, taking time to learn about their strategies, their history, and their culture. He was no longer the distant man who had married her for political reasons. He was now someone she could see standing beside her as an ally, a partner. And yet, despite the growing respect she had for him, a part of Alara couldn't shake the fear that still lingered in her heart. What if humanity's past could not be erased? What if Steele's desire to change was not enough? The weight of her responsibility pressed down on her with every decision she made, every strategy she approved. The night before the battle, Alara stood alone in her chambers once again, looking out at the stars. She could feel the eyes of her people upon her, and she knew that the outcome of this battle would decide not only Calera's future, but also the fate of her marriage. It was not just a battle between the Caleri and the T-Rashka, it was a battle between the past and the future. A knock on her door broke her thoughts, and she turned to see Steele standing in the doorway. His uniform was slightly rumpled, his hair falling into his eyes, but there was a quiet strength in his posture that she had come to admire. "May I speak with you?" he asked quietly. Alara nodded, her throat dry. She knew that this was a moment of reckoning. Whether they were ready or not, tomorrow would change everything. Steele stepped into the room, his gaze never leaving hers. "I just wanted to say, no matter what happens tomorrow, I'm proud to stand beside you. I'm proud to fight for Calera and for the future we're trying to build. I won't let you down." Alara felt a knot in her chest loosen slightly. "And I won't let you down, Steele. We're in this together no matter what." For the first time since their wedding, Alara truly felt the weight of her decision, the gravity of the choice she had made. She wasn't sure if they were ready for what was coming, but she knew one thing. Tomorrow, they would fight not just for survival, but for a chance to prove that the past did not have to define the future. As Steele left her chambers, Alara allowed herself a brief moment of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, this fragile alliance could lead to something better. Maybe, in the end, it was possible for even the darkest histories to be rewritten. The morning of the battle arrived quickly, and with it came the weight of all the decisions that had led to this moment. Alara stood on the balcony of her private chambers, gazing at the horizon where the first light of dawn slowly illuminated the skies of Calera. The air was thick with tension, the kind that hung heavily before a storm, and she could feel it in her bones. This was not just a battle for her people. It was a battle for everything she had fought for, everything she had worked to protect. The Federation's forces had arrived in full force, ready to stand with the Calari against the T-Rashka. The ships were already positioned in orbit around Calera's moon, and the ground forces were preparing to mobilize. Alara had been involved in every step of the strategy, and now, as the time for action approached, she felt both a sense of duty and a growing sense of fear. The T-Rashka were merciless, and if they attacked with full force, Calera might not survive. She turned away from the balcony, her mind racing. She had made her choice. She had chosen to marry Steel, to trust the Federation, and to believe that humanity could change. But as the hours ticked down to the battle, Alara wasn't sure anymore if she had made the right decision. She had placed her faith in Steel and in the Federation, but there was a part of her that couldn't ignore the fear that humanity's past would one day catch up with them. The Federation may have promised peace, but history had shown that peace was fragile, and so was trust. The sound of footsteps behind her broke her thoughts, and Alara turned to see Steel entering the room. His uniform was spotless, his face grim. There was no trace of the man who had once seemed distant and cold. Today, he was all business. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, Alara saw the weight of the responsibility he carried. He was no longer just the soldier who had pledged himself to her for the sake of a political alliance. He was a man who had become something more, someone she could rely on, for better or for worse. "Princess," Steel said quietly, his voice calm but filled with resolve. "It's time. The Federation's forces are ready. We'll begin the attack at 0 hour." Alara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, the reality of it was overwhelming. "I know," she said, her voice steady. "I'll be ready." Steel didn't leave immediately. Instead, he took a step toward her, his expression softening. "Alara, I know you've had doubts about me, about us, about everything. But I promise you this, we will win this fight together. You made the right choice. You chose the future, not just for Calera, but for all of us." She met his gaze, the sincerity in his eyes almost too much to bear. Despite her fears, despite the uncertainty that still lingered in her heart, she knew that Steel had become someone she could trust, someone who would stand beside her no matter what. She wasn't alone in this anymore. Together, they were stronger than the past that threatened to tear them apart. "I want to believe that, Steel," she said softly. "I do, but we can't change the past. We can only move forward, and I need you by my side no matter what happens." Steel nodded, his jaw tightening in determination. "I'm here. I'll always be here." With those words, Alara felt a surge of hope that she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. This battle wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that the mistakes of the past didn't have to define their future. If humanity could change, if Calera could survive, then maybe, just maybe, the galaxy could be rebuilt on something stronger than destruction. The battle began as planned. The Federation's ships engaged the T-Rashka in the skies above Calera, their powerful weapons lighting up the dark expanse of space. On the ground, the Caleri forces, bolstered by Federation troops, moved into position. Alara stood with Steel, watching the battle unfold through the large observation windows in the war room. The tension was unbearable, but she knew that she had to remain focused. This was no time for doubt. The T-Rashka were ruthless, launching wave after wave of attacks. Their warships were enormous, their weapons devastating. But the Federation's forces fought back with everything they had. Alara could see the Caleri forces moving strategically, using the terrain of their world to their advantage. Steel's Federation officers led with precision, coordinating the attack with an efficiency that made Alara believe in their strength. Minutes felt like hours as the battle raged on. The sky above Calera was filled with the roar of energy blasts and the cries of war. But through it all, Alara felt something shift inside her. The fear that had gripped her heart began to loosen, replaced by a quiet confidence. She had made the right choice. She had chosen to believe in the possibility of a better future. And now, as the Federation and the Caleri fought side by side, she could see the fruits of that choice. But the T-Rashka were not easy to defeat. They fought fiercely, their ships closing in on the Federation's forces. Alara's heart pounded as the battle grew more intense. She could feel the weight of the decision she had made, the lives of her people hanging in the balance. She had to trust Steel, had to trust that his vision of a new humanity was real. As the battle reached its peak, the T-Rashka unleashed their final assault. Their largest warship, a massive vessel capable of devastating entire cities, launched a full barrage of weapons aimed directly at Calera's capital. Alara's breath caught in her throat as she watched the missile streak toward the planet, its trajectory certain. It was a direct hit. There was no way to stop it. But then, just as the missile was about to impact, a bright flash of light exploded from the Federation's flagship. The missile was intercepted, destroyed in midair by a barrage of energy blasts. The sky lit up with a second explosion, and Alara's heart leapt in her chest. "They did it," she whispered in disbelief. "They actually did it." Steele's voice came through the comms system, his tone filled with relief. "The T-Rashka are retreating. We've won, Alara." "We've won?" Alara felt a flood of emotions rush through her, relief, joy, exhaustion. The battle was over, and they had won. The T-Rashka had been forced to retreat, their forces shattered. Calera had survived, but it wasn't just the victory that struck her. It was the realization that she had chosen the right path. Steele had proven that humanity could change. He had shown her that there was hope for the future, even in the darkest of times. She turned to Steele, her eyes filled with gratitude and something more, something that had been growing in her heart since the moment they had first met. She didn't just trust him anymore. She believed in him. Steele stood beside her, his face weary but triumphant. "We did it," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Together." Alara smiled back, her heart swelling with pride. "Together," she repeated. As the Federation forces celebrated their hard-earned victory, Alara and Steele stood side by side, looking out at the stars. The battle had been won, but the real work was just beginning. The future of Calera and of humanity was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Alara felt a sense of peace. They had a chance, a real chance, to build something better, something lasting. And together, they would face whatever came next.